Welcome to the conference. Lovely to have you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry about my background. I tried to put the proper one on and for some reason it didn't work.
Oh, just to make sure, are you using Chrome?
Yes,
Oh, I don't know
I
what
don't
happens
know.
with
It's
this
probably
platform for
me.
sometimes. So, everyone, Susan Evans is about to tell us how to light the hidden in organizations. I guess somehow it's related to what Terence told us just now, but I'm not going to be ahead of myself. Let me know when you need the slides. I'm going to be listening in the shadow for your talk, so it's all yours. And thank you for coming once again.
Oh, thank you so much. And hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Huge thanks to Artem for organising this amazing conference for some fantastic storytellers. I very much enjoyed Terence's presentation and looking forward to sharing some ideas with you about using stories in organisations going through change. So I'm Suzanne, as Artem said. I am a consultant, a researcher and a podcaster in the area of organisation change and storytelling. My background is in Big Four consulting. I started to get a bit frustrated about the way that we were managing change in the organisations that I was working with. So I've been on a journey myself trying to understand how we can make a difference to creating change in organisations. And this is what I've discovered. So I'm really excited to share it with you. So Artem, whenever you're ready. Thank you. So first of all, I want to bust some myths about change management and change in organisations. So if any of you in the room have anything to do with creating change in organisations, you probably will have seen something of these two images that I've got here. So let's do the first one at the top first. So 70%. What we think we know is that 70% of change fails. This is sometimes what we're told. There's a lot of literature in this area. I'm here to tell you that that's not true. The data that this was based on, which is from some analysis that was done by McKinsey a few years ago, is flawed. The original journal article that this came from is misquoted in most cases, and it doesn't have to be this way. So for sure, change can be difficult because it involves people, and people are different, and everyone has a different view on the world. But it doesn't need to be as difficult as we think it is. And part of the reason that I like to use stories in organizations going through change is to really understand the reality of people who are in that organization in that moment. I was listening to Terence's talk earlier on, and I really loved when he said that stories facilitate aha moments. And for me, this is where stories really come into their own during a period of change. Often when we're going through change using a process-driven approach to change, so if we do step A, step B, and then step C, and then we'll have success, we miss out on some of these nuances in the organization. And this is where stories can really help us. My second image on this slide is a representation or my representation of the change curve. So you may well have seen the change curve where it goes kind of like that. And the theory is that people start in a certain place around something new that's going on in the organization. They go through a dip in the middle, and then at the end, they come out feeling better. For me, this is also not applicable in the way that people experience change. It was actually developed as something to show how people experience grief. So after somebody has died. For me, in organizations that I work with, people don't follow this linear transition of how a change happens, how they feel, and how they move through this process. It offers some useful words for people to understand how they might be feeling in a particular moment. But I like to show it as this kind of curve where there's a bit in the middle which is quite messy. So people can be unhappy with what's going on in the organization. People can be really happy about what's going on in the organization. And they can feel these things all on the same day, depending on what's going on in their life, their role in the organization, and a whole load of other things, which we don't understand if we don't get down into the detail. And this is where stories can really get underneath what's hidden in organizations. And there's a few things that we need to think about. If we think about the way that we look at organizations, it's often as a rational, process-driven collection of people, whereas actually what we know is there's a whole load of things going on under the surface. There are things we can see. So documents and websites and strategy documents and all these sorts of things, but there are a whole load of other stuff going on that we actually can't see, and stories are a way of us getting access to some of this information. What I found through both my experience as a consultant, so I've been doing that for over 25 years, but also my own research when I did my PhD, is that there's a number of factors that influence organisations that can act as anchors to stop them from moving forward. So the first of these is organisational history. When a change has happened in an organisation previously, the memory of this change hangs around. And I've seen it regularly where there's been a technology implementation. I'm working on one at the moment with a client. They're introducing a new IT system, and I hear often conversations and stories being told about what happened the last time they introduced a technology system like this about 10 years ago and how terrible that was. I'm sure if any of you have worked on a similar project, you understand where I'm coming from. If we don't listen to these stories and we don't understand what people are trying to say, we don't have the opportunity to demonstrate and understand how the project we're working on this time is different. If we don't hear those stories, we can't do things differently this time. We can't learn any lessons. So this cultural memory and the history of change within the organisation can really act as an anchor to stop us from moving forward. And there are stories told about this all the time. But in my experience, organisations and leaders within organisations often don't listen to these stories. They don't have the opportunity to hear them. We can also think about nostalgia. So when I'm working in organisations, I regularly hear stories about how great things used to be in the past. Remember when this used to happen? Remember when we all used to go out for lunch together, and that doesn't happen anymore? Again, these can tell us some really interesting insights about what people value in the organisation. And it gives us an opportunity to try and take forward what they value into this new way of doing things, into the new strategy or the new structure or the new approach that we're taking as a result of the change. So this history is something that's really important to try and understand. Some of that will be written down. So many organisations have some kind of origin story, which is written on their website. There will be documents in some organisations that talk about how they were founded and what the values are, but that only tells us half of the story. We can really only understand everything about an organisation history by understanding some of the more informal stories that are told about this organisation and what it means to work there. The second thing that it's really important to consider when you're going through a change, some of these things that happen under the surface, is what I call employee identity. So this is how an employee feels about the organisation and their place within it at a particular moment in time. Now, resistance to change is something that I have certainly changed my view on over the years. So when I first started out in consulting, I was told stories about resistant acts that took place in organisations when there was a piece of change going on. I often saw these acts as something that was done by people who were being difficult, who were not agreeing with what was happening. I've actually changed my thoughts on this over the last few years. I now see this level of resistance as being some kind of super engagement with the change. If you're not interested in the change that's going on, then you're not going to resist it. You're just going to be apathetic towards it. If you're resistant enough or engaged enough in the change to ask questions, to want more information, to challenge the leaders of this change, for me, that's a good thing. And as a change agent, as a consultant, as a leader, I need to be listening to that. I need to be taking notice of people who want more information, who are asking questions, who are challenging the status quo. Because if I don't ask questions, I don't engage with what they're saying, I don't know what they're resisting, right? So is it the thing that's happening? Is it the change that's taking place? Is it the way that it's being implemented? Is it something else altogether in the organisation? And this just gives them an opportunity to challenge and ask questions. So we need to be looking at the root causes of this resistance. Sadly, so much of the literature around change resistance is very negative, both in the academic and the popular management press. And I think we need to look at how we write about it. But for me, change resistance is super engagement. I would rather have somebody asking me lots of questions than people just sit there and not engage with what I'm saying to them. Some of the other aspects around employee identity is also how I as an employee see myself in relation to management, but also into outsiders. And this is often consultants who are brought in to support a change program, of which I am one, of course. When I did my PhD research, I worked with the same organisation for 3 years, and I met with the same group of managers for 3 years about every 6 weeks to talk to them about the change and how they felt about it. And what I saw was, over that period, their view of the change in relation to themselves, but also their view of the consultants and leaders who were doing this change, really fluctuated. So at the start of the process, they understood what was going on and they were really happy with the changes as they were proposed. As time went on, they became more frustrated. The consultants started to do things that they didn't like. They started to feel like the consultants didn't fit with the organisation, and so they started to challenge a bit more what was going on. So this view of myself in relation to others can change over time. I think back to when I first started out in change consulting 20 odd years ago, and we used to do a stakeholder analysis at the start of a change process, and we probably would never look at it again. That's a mistake in my view. You have to keep coming back to it, keep meeting people where they are, keep trying to understand where people are at, so that you can build something that's going to work for people and you can bring people on the journey with you. And the final point here are some of the underpinning things in an organisation that affect how things are done around here. So we often think about culture in that sense. It's the way that things are done in an organisation. So these are assumptions that are made, behaviours, values and culture. Some of these will be written down, some of these won't be, and we'll have to try and understand them as we work in the organisation. And this can be really challenging for consultants like me, but actually for anyone in the organisation to really try and uncover some of these hidden factors. So what I've created is a model, a tool for helping us delve down into these hidden factors and unearth some of the stories to help us understand the hidden bits of organisations so that we can work with the organisation where they are. And that's a big theme in my work. As a consultant, as a change leader, we can try and move people towards the change that we want to create, but we have to start where the people are that we're working with. We can't start where we think they are. We have to start where they actually are. So this is my model, how you find your change story. And the use of the orchestra as a metaphor for this is deliberate. So we have a number of instruments working together. We have the change agent or the leader at the front who's the conductor, but they can't create anything without everyone else supporting them and working together. So it's a group exercise. This is something that's co-created. We need to have the people in the room, the people in the organisation working together to play the piece of music, to create the change, with the change agent and the leader leading them and conducting them in the right direction. So there's 5 things that I think we need to look at and do when we're trying to work with stories and organisations to illuminate the hidden. The first one is attention, so represented by the conductor's baton. We need to pay attention to what's going on around us. I find myself in organisations all the time where people are busy, people rush from meeting to meeting, they have Zoom call after Zoom call, Teams meeting after Teams meeting, and they never actually have a chance to pay attention to what's going on around them. But when we're working in organisations, there are stories being told all the time around us, and we need to take heed of them, particularly as a leader and as a change agent, so that we can understand what's going on in the organisation. And this is beyond formal communications, beyond question and answer sessions or big communication meetings. This is just the day-to-day things, the day-to-day conversations and stories that we need to listen to. Now, this is harder to do these days because so many of us work like we are now, so over a screen in a hybrid fashion. So we have to pay more attention to paying attention. But it's so important, and I'll illustrate that with a little story. So some time ago, I was working with an organisation and they were going through a big change, and this involved closing some offices. And this was a big deal for them. They'd been in existence for about 150 years. And in that time, they had never closed an office before. So this was a big change for them. No one had ever lost their job. No one had ever been made redundant. So they gave people a lot of notice. so that they had time to find another job. They had time to process what was going on. They actually gave people a year's notice that this change was going to happen, which is a pretty long time. So the leaders went to this office. They did the usual kind of town hall meeting where they got everyone together and they gave a presentation about what was going to happen. They gave everyone the chance to ask some questions, and then they went away. And over the next few months, people came in and out and kept checking in to make sure everyone was all right. But there wasn't really much presence at this office by the leaders or the people doing the change. In this office, it was Christmas time, and they decorated it with Christmas decorations. And then after Christmas, they boxed all the decorations up and put them under the stairs in the office. The plan was to donate the decorations to a local hospital so that they had them once the office had closed. The person who was supposed to be giving those decorations to the local hospital actually left the organisation, and so the decorations never left. They stayed under the stairs, and so the story started to circulate that the office wasn't going to close because the Christmas decorations were still in the building. So therefore, the office must be open next Christmas because the decorations were still there. Now that might seem silly, but don't forget the dominant force in this organisation was inertia, was not to change. So people assumed that things would carry on as normal. And no one heard this story. No one from the project team, no one from human resources, nobody in the leadership perspective heard this story because they weren't there. So eventually, a few months later, when people went back to actually say, well, this is what's happening and now you need to go and find another job, people were very angry and people were upset because they felt like they'd been misled. Some people might think this is a silly example. I actually saw it happen in real life. So this is what these people felt. And because nobody was there to hear this story, it created problems. It made a difficult situation a lot more difficult. So for me, that perfectly illustrates the need to be paying attention to what's going on. And as a leader, you need to be paying attention to the informal as well as the things that you hear through formal channels. The second element of this is reflection. So we need to take time to reflect. Again, this can be really difficult in a day when you have 10 meetings and you have no time between. How do you find the time to reflect between all these different things that you have to do? Well, it's really important to build it in. And it's even more important to build it in if you have a change project that you're working on. There's a wonderful article in the MIT Sloan Management Review, which talks about the dysfunctional momentum that can occur on a project where it keeps going and going and going, and no one ever says, oh, we should stop, because the project plan is telling us we have to finish by July. And so we just keep going and going because that's what we must do, even though we know that this isn't being successful. So creating some time to reflect is so essential so that we can course correct. If things are going wrong, if we're hearing things through our paying attention, then we can start to make changes to the way that we're doing things. And in projects and programs that I'm working on, I like to make sure that every 6 weeks we have a pause. We go out and speak to everybody to find out how things are doing. We take time to listen to what's going on in the organisation, and then we make changes to what we're doing to make sure that we continue on the right path. So this reflection time is important. It's also important individually. Reflection is a superpower. For me, having time to think and reflect about what's going on, to think about what I need to do rather than rushing forward all the time, really helps me be at my best. So building time into reflection is essential. Thirdly, we need to focus on inquiry. I don't know about you, many change programs that I've either experienced as an employee or I've worked on as a consultant are focused on advocacy for the change. So we're trying to persuade people why the change is a good idea, rather than going out there and asking questions about what people need and how this change might help them. And this goes back to what I said earlier about resistance. I think in organisations, leaders and change agents are sometimes afraid to ask too many questions in case, first of all, they get asked a question that they don't know the answer to. And secondly, they start to hear things that they don't really want to hear. So we get this pushback, this resistance and challenge. We need to really resist that urge, and we need to be open, and we need to be out there asking questions, inviting responses, rather than it being one-way communication of what's going on. And I talk about this in a change context, but actually this is true for leadership in every context in an organization. It has to be two-way. We need to be inviting this by inquiring and understanding what's going on in the organization. This helps us also with the fourth point, which is appreciation. So we need to be appreciating the best of what is. So I use a lot of appreciative inquiry in my work, and appreciating the best of what is at the core of this approach. So it's about understanding what people really value about the organization right now, and then trying to take this forward into the future as much as we can. And we can't understand this if we're not out there asking questions and listening to what's going on. There's lots of research to show that people are more likely to be receptive to something new if they can see how it links back to something that they value from the past. So we need to be understanding what people value. It's back to this nostalgia again. What are people talking about? What do they love about the organization? How can we take this forward into the future? How can we appreciate it and keep that going so that the organization isn't continually changing? We're actually taking forward what works well. And thinking back again to my time as a young consultant, we used to go into an organization, we'd do a review of everything they were doing, and then we'd come back to them and tell them how we were going to do everything differently. And then we wondered why they didn't like what we were saying. Well, it's because we weren't showing them that we appreciated what had been done before. And the final stage is to pull all of this together and tell the story. So to create a change story which explains to people in the organization what's going to be happening and how it's going to work for them. Now, I just want to ask a question quickly, and this is either you can think about this yourself or that we can put it in the chat. We'll see how we get on. But I've talked a little bit there about how leaders can inquire and communicate and some of the things they need to be thinking about. And I'm going to come on to in a second how to build a change story so that you can share these things with people in a way that feels engaging. I'd like you to think about a time when you were in an organization and you experienced change. Think about how it was communicated to you. What has stuck with you from that communication and what did you forget? So there's lots of research to show that stories are really powerful means of communication because we remember a lot more through a story than if we're told facts. It's something like 7 times as much. So if you're just presented with a series of facts about what's going to happen, you're much less likely to remember it than if you're told a story about what's going to happen. So have a think about previous experiences of change. And then I'm going to talk to you about how I would like to see change communicated. And this is based on my own experience, my research, and we can think about how that might be different. So if we want to tell a really compelling change story, so a story about the change, there's a number of things that we need to be doing. First of all, we need to be finding the content for that story. Well, if you've done all the things that were in my model in ARIAs, so paying attention, reflection, etc., you will have loads of content that you can use to create a story. But you also can look in the organization for things that already exist. So I've talked about strategy documents, websites. You can look at some artifacts around the organization. So are there photographs on display? Are there trophies? Are there awards in reception? All these sorts of things that you can use to find some of the content for a story that you might want to tell. You can pull all this together then and make your story out of it. And the template that I'll show you on the next slide gives you the tools to do that. And I'm very happy, by the way, to share a PDF of this so that you have a copy of it so that you can use it for your own use. Then we also need to think about how we tell this story. I often work with leaders in organizations to help them create their story that they want to tell about a new strategy or about the organization. And these can either be in a written form or more often than not, they're told like we're talking now. So in a presentation. So we need to think about how we tell that story. What is the most compelling way to tell that story? So we need to think about performance. And I think sometimes leaders feel nervous about the idea of performing, because it makes them feel like they're on stage and they're being judged, and perhaps they're not very confident with that. It makes them feel vulnerable. I always say to people that I work with, this is not about being a great entertainer. It's not about being a comedian and making everybody laugh. It's about being authentically you and telling your story in the way that works for you best. So it's pulling that out and trying to understand how we are, how we want to communicate, and how we can make the best of the story that we have to tell. And the final point here is that every time you tell a story, it's going to be different. So you could tell the same story 20 times, but each time the audience is different, the situation is different, and you need to make sure that you're reacting to those differences. So these are the things to consider. So the final thing I want to leave you with is this template that you can use to tell a story. So first of all, you can talk about what you've discovered. So this is all the content that you've talked about previously in what you've discovered through your story finding and everything else. We can talk about who we are as an organization, what is important to us. And then you can talk about what's going to change. So this is about inquiring and understanding what's going on in the organization, this change that we're trying to create, and explaining it really clearly to people what's going to happen, which leads on to the next stage. We are going to. So what exactly is going to happen? We can explain this really clearly. I talked earlier about often this is talked about in a presentation. We share some facts, but we don't really talk about what's going to change. What is people's experience of this change going to be like? And we can do this very clearly here. No management speak, no consultant speak, very, very simply explaining what's going to happen in the future. And the fourth bit here, the costume change, so that this is where we paint a picture of what's going to change. Again, often we resort back to facts. What we want to do here is to show people what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like in this new world that they're going to work in, what their day-to-day life is going to be like afterwards. I had a client who actually created a series of cartoons using real people in the organization to demonstrate what an organization is going to look like post-change. And it worked really well. It got people talking about what was going to happen. So we're then able to say, and now, so what is this future going to look like? What are people going to do differently? How can people find out more information? Again, often missing in change communications. Where can people go next? Where can people ask questions? Where can people get involved? We need to be really clear about that as we're telling this story. So I hope already you can see that this is different to perhaps how change is communicated traditionally in organizations, which is a series of facts and figures about what's happening. Often it's just a project plan. These are the activities we're going to do, rather than how is this going to affect me as an employee in the organization. I could go talk about this all day, but I know we're running out of time. So just to finish off, I will share this as a PDF with Artem. Artem, I'm hoping you might be able to share it with people. There's more detail on that if you want to use the template. But if you want to get in touch to find out more, this is me. Look me up on LinkedIn. I'm always writing about stories and change management. I'd love to connect with you all and talk about change management and stories in a lot more detail. It's one of my favorite subjects. So I am truly honored to be able to share this with you today. Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for making it so practical. Thank you.
You're so welcome. It needs to be, because otherwise it's, I'm so passionate. I want people to start using stories in organizations more. And the way to do that is to give people tools to be able to do it.
Yay. I exactly agree on this one. I copied some of your contacts into the chat. So if I may, while we're waiting for the questions, guys, we have the opportunity to ask Susan something about change story or other kinds of story. Here's a question from my side. Change story hasn't changed pretty much over the years. I mean, there was if you look at it, we had something in the past, then something happened. So now we need a new approach. This has been like this for ages. I want to know, what do you notice in the latest years that needs to be known about change story? Are there any changes that are happening with the change story recently?
What I'm finding is that leaders in organizations seem to be more comfortable with the idea of using story in the way that they communicate change, but also for themselves. So I first started using story in my work probably about 10 years ago. And when I first started, I think it was seen as a bit weird. Using stories was weird. I think now what I'm seeing is leaders understand the power of story. It's more mainstream. So they are coming to me saying, Suzanne, I know I understand the power of story, but I want to use it myself. Can you help me? And so I think that's the difference that I'm seeing. And we're seeing it in different contexts. So instead of just being about communication, which often it has been in the past, leaders are starting to see story as something that they can use during periods of change. So it's becoming more mainstream, which is great. And I think leaders are less afraid of using it in their practice.
That's good. I like to hear
right?
that.
Yeah.
As a story practitioner, yeah, I love to hear that. Awesome. Another question while we are, I'm looking forward to hearing some from the chat, or just, write something that you take away as an insight. Please share. I have one more for like the practical side of it. There is this part of the change story that leaders rarely want to tell. Like, for example, I had one manager introducing a CRM system. He was very vigorous about talking about the new applications of this system, the benefits it brings, etc. But he was struggling to be honest about how good was it without the system in the world where we previously were. He was starting from I would say the side of like opposition, like I have something good for you, and people were like, no, we are living in the past, we are comfortable. If he could step towards them and talk about how the world changed, that would be great. This is one of the struggles I have faced when working with change. Maybe you could share some of the struggles that you face, like typically when you are working with leaders who want to introduce change through story.
I mean, I think that's an experience that most change practitioners will have had, is that people think the past was so much better, and how do you move people from that? And it's really difficult because you can't make people think differently. And equally, I mentioned before about change and advocacy for change. We spend too much time in that space trying to persuade people that our view is better. I think what we need to be doing is understanding where people are. So if people are still in that space that the past was better than the future, we need to be really understanding why they think that is the case. And going back to what I said earlier about appreciation, there might be parts from that past experience that actually are good and we can try and take forward into the future. So is there a way that we can link the past and the future together so that we can show that continuous thread from the past to the future? It's very difficult to make people feel differently about things if you're not paying any attention to these things that they value from the past. So for me, it's about trying to connect it together. Mm-hmm. And I think also this, especially with technology change, this often comes from bad experiences with previous technology changes where it was implemented badly and it didn't work and it caused lots of difficulties, etc., etc. We've all been there. So I think using story in that instead of a more traditional approach to change is really great as a way of demonstrating how this time is different. So if from the first instance that people hear about a change program and it's told using story as a structure, it already feels different to communications that they've had before. They've sat there, there's been some PowerPoint that's been trying to persuade them that it's the best idea for them, and they get angry because of the fact that they don't understand what it means for them. If we tell them a story so that they do understand what it means, automatically it feels like a different experience. So I think there's a real opportunity to use story as a way to show that difference.
Love it. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. We have one more question from Vinod, and I like that you actually touched on it a bit, answering to my previous question. But Vinod is going specific. With the advancement of technology, most organizations will need to change, adapt rapidly. What's your view on how leaders can adopt storytelling to lead their people through rapid change with caps lock, especially consider the organization needs to be quick?
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing for years, haven't we, about how, change is a constant, changes, we're going through unprecedented change. I mean, so much that it's precedented, I think now that it's constant. We live in this world. So yeah, Vinod, I absolutely understand and sympathize with that situation. For me, it's about becoming so comfortable with using story in our practice that it's just the way that we do things. So it doesn't matter whether we've got 12 months to do a change or whether we need to do a very quick team briefing to explain something different to people and we need to do it in 10 minutes. We need to be building those storytelling principles, so helping people understand where we're coming from, where we're going, what it means to them, where they can go for more information, inviting questions. We need to be doing that in every type of change communications that we do, so that we're constantly using storytelling as the fundamental underpinning, I think, of the change that we do. And awesome. I like your story, by the way, Carol, that you've shared in the chat. Thank you.
No, about the streets, yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely.
Resonates a lot with the Christmas decorations.
Yeah.
Love it. All right, Susan, it was terrific. And again, I like the link that you've put to Terence's talk, and I like how you addressed what Kat is bringing next with her colleague Chris about listening. So thank you for being this bridge connecting the talks. And I have one last question for you. A story is a lighthouse, and it can lead us away from the danger, but a chain of lighthouses can lead us through the dangerous waters. So what story would you like more people to tell to create more lighthouses in the world?
Well, I don't want to copy Terence because I heard his answer to this question as well. But for me, it is vulnerability. So I think we have this view of leaders that they have to know everything. They have to have all the answers. And that creates this environment of not reflecting, not stopping, not saying, yes, this isn't going the way we want it to go. I would like to hear more stories from leaders where they put their hand up and say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Or, I don't know, what do you think, to the rest of the room? And I think for me, we don't hear enough of that from leadership. And it then creates this environment where people are scared to not know, which can then create this dysfunctional momentum. So vulnerability, not having all the answers. I'd like to see more stories about that.
Awesome. Thank you. Great theme and a great talk. Guys, let's share our fires with Susan. That was a great continuation of the evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great to be here.
Thank you. Please feel free to stay and